The photograph is dated 1879. It shows a young woman in a wedding dress, her hands folded in her lap, her face turned slightly away from the camera as if she cannot bear to look directly at the lens. The dress is simple, homespun cotton with lace at the collar, the kind a farmer's daughter might wear. But it is not the dress that draws the eye. It is her expression, empty, hollow, as if something essential has been carved out from behind her eyes. The photographer who took this image, a man named Augustus Webb, would later tell his wife that he felt cold in the woman's presence, that the studio, despite the summer heat, seemed to frost over when she entered, that when he developed the plate he saw something in the background that had not been there during the sitting, a shadow, a shape, something that looked almost like a man standing just behind her shoulder, but when he looked again it was gone. The woman's name was Evangeline Marsh. And by the time this photograph was taken, she had already buried 3 husbands. She would bury 4 more before anyone thought to ask questions, before anyone thought to wonder why the men who married Evangeline Marsh never lived to see their first anniversary, before anyone thought to look in the well behind her farmhouse where the water ran red on certain nights, and where, if you listened carefully, you could hear something scratching at the stones from below. Welcome to this channel. Today we step into a case that is not just difficult to understand, it reshapes the meaning of fear itself. Like the video, subscribe to this channel and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Granger Valley sits in the mountains of western North Carolina, a narrow cleft between 2 ridges where the sun rises late and sets early. In the 1870s, it was home to perhaps 200 souls, scattered across farms and homesteads that clung to the hillsides like barnacles. Life was hard there. The soil was thin, the winters brutal, the nearest town a day's ride on horseback. People were born, worked, and died within a radius of a few miles. They married their neighbors. They buried their dead in family plots on their own land. They asked few questions and expected fewer answers. It was the kind of place where a person could disappear and no one would notice for weeks, where secrets could be kept for generations, where the past lay heavy on the land like morning fog. Evangeline Marsh was born in Granger Valley in 1857, the only child of Thomas and Ruth Marsh. Her father was a farmer, her mother a midwife. They lived on 40 acres at the head of the valley, where the creek ran fastest and coldest. Neighbors described the family as quiet, withdrawn, rarely seen at church or social gatherings. Thomas Marsh was known to have a temper. Ruth Marsh was known to have skills with herbs and tinctures that some whispered bordered on witchcraft, but whispers were all they remained. In a place like Granger Valley, everyone had secrets. Everyone had things they preferred to keep buried. Evangeline grew up isolated, seeing few people beyond her parents. She was educated at home, taught to read from her mother's Bible and her father's almanac. She learned to sew, to cook, to tend the garden. But she also learned other things. Things her mother taught her in the stillness of the night when Thomas Marsh was asleep. How to brew teas that could bring sleep or stop a heart. How to read the patterns in smoke and water. How to listen for the voices that spoke in the wind. Ruth Marsh, according to a diary discovered in the ruins of the family home in 1947, believed that their land was special. That something old lived in the valley, something that had been there long before the white settlers arrived, something that the Cherokee had known about and feared. She wrote, quote, "The creek runs from a spring deep in the mountain. The spring is fed by water that comes from below, from a place where the earth is thin and the old things can reach through. I have heard them. I have felt them. They are hungry, they are patient, and they are waiting for someone who can hear them as I do," unquote. When Evangeline was 16, her mother died. The official cause was listed as fever, but there were those who said Ruth Marsh had been found in the woods near the spring, her body cold and unmarked, her eyes open and staring at something no one else could see. Thomas Marsh buried his wife on the property and said nothing. He became even more reclusive, even more volatile. Neighbors who encountered him at the trading post said he looked haunted, aged 20 years in a matter of months. He would not speak of Ruth. He would not speak of much at all. It was in the spring of 1875 that Evangeline Marsh, now 18 years old, married for the first time. Her husband was a man named Jacob Pritchard, a widower of 35 who owned a small farm on the western slope of the valley. How the courtship occurred, if there was a courtship at all, no one could say. Evangeline was rarely seen in public. Jacob Pritchard was a solitary man who kept to himself. But on a gray morning in March, they stood before Reverend Simon Cole and exchanged vows in the small church that served the valley. There were no guests, no celebration. The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. Reverend Cole would later write in a letter to his brother, quote, "I have performed many marriages in my years of service. I have wed the joyful and the somber, the young and the old. But I have never felt such unease as I did that morning." The girl, and she was little more than a girl, spoke her vows in a voice so flat it was as if she were reading from a ledger. The man looked as though he were walking to his own execution. When I pronounced them husband and wife, neither smiled, neither moved to embrace. They simply turned and walked out of the church. I watched them go and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. I have not seen them since, unquote. Jacob Pritchard was found dead in his barn 6 weeks after the wedding. His body was discovered by a neighbor who had come to borrow a plow. Jacob was hanging from the rafters, a rope around his neck, his face purple and swollen. The neighbor, a man named Henry Weeks, ran to fetch the sheriff. By the time they returned, Evangeline was standing in the yard, her face expressionless, her hands clasped in front of her. She told the sheriff that Jacob had been despondent, that he had spoken of ending his life, that she had tried to stop him but had been unable. The sheriff, a man named Thomas Gaines, recorded the death as a suicide. There was no investigation, no questions asked. In Granger Valley, suicide was not uncommon. The isolation, the hardship, the long winters took their toll. It was unfortunate, it was tragic, but it was not suspicious. Evangeline returned to her father's farm. She wore black for a month, then set it aside. She did not speak of Jacob Pritchard. She did not visit his grave. It was as if he had never existed. But there were those who noticed things, small things, strange things. Henry Weeks, the man who had found Jacob's body, told his wife that when he had entered the barn he had smelled something. Not death, not decay, something else. Something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in a closed room. He said that Jacob's eyes had been open, staring at the barn door, and that there had been an expression on his face that Henry could not describe. Fear, certainly, but something beyond fear, horror, recognition. As if in his final moments Jacob had seen something that no man should see. Henry's wife dismissed this as the ramblings of a man shaken by discovering a corpse, but Henry insisted. He said that when he had looked at Evangeline standing in the yard, waiting for them to return, he had felt certain of one thing. She had known Jacob was dead before Henry found him. She had known because she had watched it happen. In the months following Jacob Pritchard's death, Thomas Marsh's behavior grew more erratic. He was seen wandering the property at night, carrying a lantern, calling out to someone who was not there. He stopped tending his fields. His livestock began to die one by one of no apparent cause. Neighbors who ventured close to the Marsh farm reported hearing sounds from the house, crying, shouting, and sometimes, late at night, laughter, high and wild and utterly without joy. In November of 1875, Thomas Marsh disappeared. He was last seen by a peddler who had stopped at the farm to sell supplies. The peddler later told the sheriff that Thomas had seemed agitated, paranoid, that he had refused to let the peddler enter the house, that he had kept looking over his shoulder as if expecting someone to appear. The peddler had left quickly, unsettled by the encounter. When Thomas did not appear in town for several weeks, neighbors went to investigate. They found the farm seemingly abandoned. The livestock were gone or dead. The fields were overgrown, the house was empty, but there were signs of recent habitation, food on the table. A fire burned down to coals in the hearth, and in the bedroom, on the wall above the bed, someone had written a message in what appeared to be charcoal. It read, quote, "She is not my daughter anymore," unquote. Thomas Marsh was never found. No body was discovered. No evidence of foul play was uncovered. The assumption was that he had wandered into the mountains and succumbed to the elements or wild animals. It happened. People went missing in the mountains all the time. Evangeline, now alone on the farm, continued to live there as if nothing had changed. She was 19 years old. If you're still listening, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? It was in the spring of 1876 that Evangeline married for the second time. Her husband was a man named Samuel Porter, a logger who had come to Granger Valley from Tennessee. He was in his late 20s, strong, quiet, a hard worker. How he met Evangeline is unclear. Some said he had been hired to clear timber on her property. Others claimed he had simply appeared one day, and within a week they were wed. The marriage took place not in the church but in the marsh farmhouse, with only a traveling preacher as witness. The preacher, whose name is lost to history, moved on the next day and never returned to the valley. Samuel Porter moved into the marsh farm with Evangeline. For a time, things seemed normal. Samuel was seen in town occasionally, purchasing supplies, selling timber. He spoke little, but that was not unusual. He was an outsider, and outsiders were treated with caution. But those who did interact with him noticed a change over the weeks. He grew thin, haggard. His eyes developed dark circles. He seemed distracted, as if listening to something only he could hear. A shopkeeper named Margaret Hale later recalled a conversation with Samuel in July of 1876. She said, quote, "He came into the store to buy flour and coffee. I asked him how he was settling in. He looked at me as if he did not understand the question. Then he said, 'She talks to them at night.' I asked him what he meant. He said, 'She goes out to the well and she talks to them and they answer.' I thought he was joking. I laughed. He did not laugh. He just stared at me and then he left. I never saw him again." Unquote. Samuel Porter's body was found in August of 1876 at the bottom of the old well behind the marsh farmhouse. The well had not been used in years, the water having turned foul and undrinkable. A neighbor boy, playing in the woods, had thrown a stone into the well and heard it strike something solid. When adults investigated, they found Samuel's body, bloated and decaying, wedged in the narrow shaft. The sheriff ruled it an accidental death. Samuel must have leaned over the well, lost his balance, and fallen. Tragic, but not suspicious. Evangeline once again donned mourning clothes. Once again she showed no emotion. When questioned by the sheriff, she said she had not known Samuel was missing. She thought he had gone into the mountains to scout timber. She had not worried when he did not return. He often stayed away for days. The sheriff accepted this explanation. There was no reason not to. But there were those in Granger Valley who were beginning to notice a pattern. 2 husbands, both dead within a year of marriage. Both deaths ruled accidents or suicides. Both bodies discovered in disturbing circumstances. An elderly woman named Abigail Trent, who had known Ruth Marsh, spoke to a group of women at the church. She said, quote, "That girl is not right. She never has been. Ruth knew it. Ruth tried to control it, but Ruth is gone now. And whatever Ruth was keeping at bay is free. Mark my words, there will be more. There will be more." Unquote. The women dismissed Abigail as a superstitious old fool, but privately they agreed to watch, to wait, to see what would happen next. What happened next was that Evangeline married for the 3rd time. Her husband was a man named Cobb, a farmer from a neighboring valley who had recently lost his wife to influenza. He was 42, respectable, a member of the church. How he came to marry Evangeline is a mystery. There is no record of courtship, no announcement. But in January of 1877, they appeared at the church and requested that Reverend Cole perform the ceremony. Reverend Cole, who had married Evangeline to Jacob Pritchard less than 2 years earlier, hesitated. He later wrote in his journal, quote, "I asked her if she was certain. I asked him if he knew about her previous marriages. They both stared at me with such intensity that I felt as though I were the one being judged. I performed the ceremony. God forgive me, I performed the ceremony. I told myself that a woman has the right to marry, that the deaths of her previous husbands were coincidence, that I was being foolish, but I did not believe it. I do not believe it now." Unquote. Cobb moved to the Marsh farm. He was seen less and less frequently in town. When he was seen, he appeared agitated, nervous. He told a fellow farmer that strange things were happening at the farm. that he heard voices at night, that he found footprints around the well that belonged to no one in the household, that Evangeline would disappear for hours and return with mud on her dress and a look in her eyes that frightened him. The farmer, a man named Joshua Reed, advised Elias to leave, to get out while he could. Elias laughed a bitter sound and said, quote, "I cannot leave. She will not let me," unquote. Joshua did not understand what he meant. He would later wish he had pressed for details. Elias Cobb was found dead in March of 1877, less than 3 months after his marriage to Evangeline. His body was discovered in the woods about a mile from the Marsh farm. He had been mauled by an animal, or so it appeared. His throat was torn open. His chest was ripped apart. The sheriff, examining the body, concluded that Elias had been attacked by a bear or a mountain lion. Such attacks were rare but not unheard of. The body was returned to Elias' family, who buried him in their own plot. They wanted nothing to do with Evangeline. They did not invite her to the funeral. They did not speak to her. But Elias' brother, a man named Peter Cobb, was not convinced by the sheriff's explanation. Peter had hunted in those mountains his entire life. He knew the signs of animal attacks, and what he saw on his brother's body did not match. The wounds were too precise, too deliberate. The claw marks, if that's what they were spaced in a way that no bear or cat could produce. And there was something else. Elias' eyes. They had been removed, not torn out in the attack, removed carefully, cleanly, as if someone had taken a knife and cut them out. Peter Cobb went to the sheriff with his concerns. The sheriff dismissed them. Peter went to Reverend Cole. The Reverend listened but said there was nothing he could do without proof. Peter went to the Marsh farm to confront Evangeline. He never arrived. His horse was found wandering the road the next morning. Peter Cobb was never seen again. His family searched for weeks. They found no trace. Eventually, they gave up. They moved away from Granger Valley. They never spoke of Peter or Elias again. By the spring of 1877, the people of Granger Valley could no longer ignore what was happening. 3 men had married Evangeline Marsh. All 3 were dead. A 4th man had disappeared after threatening to confront her. The pattern was undeniable, but what could be done? There was no evidence of murder, no witnesses, no confessions. The deaths had all been ruled accidental or the result of natural causes. Evangeline had broken no laws. She could not be arrested. She could not be driven out. All that could be done was to warn others, to ensure that no man made the mistake of marrying her. But Granger Valley was a small place. Word spread slowly, and there were always men who did not listen, who thought themselves immune to whatever curse or evil surrounded Evangeline Marsh, who believed they could save her or control her, or simply did not care. In June of 1877, Evangeline married for the 4th time. Her husband was a young man named Daniel Frost, barely 20 years old, the son of a farmer from the southern end of the valley. Daniel's father, Robert Frost, begged his son not to go through with the marriage. He told Daniel about the previous husbands. He told him about the rumors. He told him that marrying Evangeline Marsh was a death sentence. Daniel laughed. He said his father was being superstitious. He said Evangeline was a poor widow who had suffered terrible luck. He said he loved her. Robert Frost would later say, quote, "I saw something in my son's eyes that day, something that was not him. It was as if he were speaking words that had been put into his mouth, as if he were being controlled. I tried to stop him. I tried to lock him in the house, but he broke free. He went to her, and I never saw him alive again," unquote. Daniel Frost's body was found in the Marsh farmhouse in September of 1877. He had been dead for days, possibly weeks. The smell had finally drawn the attention of a passing traveler who notified the sheriff. When the sheriff entered the house, he found Daniel lying in the bed, his body covered by a quilt, his hands folded on his chest as if he were merely sleeping. But he was not sleeping. He was dead, and his body showed signs of advanced decomposition. The sheriff's report, preserved in the county archives, describes the scene in disturbing detail. Daniel's skin was gray and waxy. His eyes were sunken. His mouth was open in what appeared to be a scream. But there were no signs of violence, no wounds, no trauma. The cause of death was listed as unknown, possibly heart failure, possibly poisoning. The sheriff could not be certain. What the sheriff did note, however, was the state of the house. It was immaculate, clean, orderly, as if someone had been maintaining it even as Daniel's body lay decomposing in the bed. There was fresh food in the pantry. The fire had been recently lit. And in the bedroom, on the nightstand beside the bed, there was a vase of wildflowers, fresh wildflowers, as if someone had picked them that very morning and placed them there beside the corpse. The sheriff searched the property. He found no sign of Evangeline. He questioned neighbors. No one had seen her in weeks. It was as if she had vanished. But the sheriff did find something else. In the barn, carved into the wooden support beam, were words, freshly carved. They read, quote, "7 will open the door," unquote. If you're still listening, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The death of Daniel Frost finally prompted action. The sheriff, Thomas Gaines, requested assistance from the state. A detective was sent from Raleigh, a man named William Thorne, who specialized in unusual cases. Thorne arrived in Granger Valley in October of 1877 with the intention of conducting a thorough investigation into the deaths surrounding Evangeline Marsh. He interviewed dozens of people. He examined the bodies of those that could be exhumed. He reviewed coroner's reports and witness statements. He visited the Marsh farm multiple times, searching for evidence, for clues, for anything that might explain what had happened. His official report, submitted in December of 1877, concluded that while the circumstances surrounding the deaths were highly suspicious, there was insufficient evidence to charge Evangeline Marsh with any crime. The deaths could not be definitively linked. The causes were too varied. The lack of witnesses was insurmountable. Thorne recommended that Evangeline be located and questioned, but without evidence of wrongdoing, she could not be compelled to return or arrested. The case was effectively closed, but Thorne's personal notes, discovered among his papers after his death in 1912, tell a different story. In those notes, Thorne wrote extensively about his time in Granger Valley, about the things he saw and heard that did not make it into his official report. He described feeling watched while at the Marsh farm. He wrote about dreams he had while staying in the valley, dreams in which he saw Evangeline standing at the edge of the woods, beckoning to him, her mouth moving but no sound emerging. He described finding objects in his room that had not been there when he went asleep: a lock of hair, a button, a smooth black stone. Most disturbing, however, was Thorne's account of his visit to the well behind the Marsh farmhouse. He wrote, quote, "I had been told that the well was where Samuel Porter's body was found. I wanted to examine it more closely. I brought a lantern and rope and lowered the light into the shaft. The well is deep, perhaps 40 feet, and narrow. The water at the bottom is black and still. As I lowered the lantern, I saw something that I cannot adequately explain. On the walls of the well, carved into the stone, were symbols, hundreds of them covering every surface. They were not random. They followed a pattern, a design that spiraled down into the darkness. I recognized none of them. They were not letters. They were not pictures. They were something else, something older. I felt a compulsion to climb down into the well to examine the symbols more closely. I actually had my leg over the edge when I heard a voice. It said, 'Not yet.' I pulled back. I looked around. There was no one there. I was alone. I left the farm immediately. I did not return. Whatever is in that well, whatever those symbols represent, it is beyond my capacity to understand or to combat," unquote. Thorne left Granger Valley in December of 1877 and never returned. His investigation was filed away and forgotten. The people of Granger Valley tried to do the same. They tried to forget about Evangeline Marsh. They tried to move on. But Evangeline was not gone. She was simply waiting. In the spring of 1878, Evangeline reappeared in Granger Valley. She was seen walking along the road toward her farm, her clothes travel-worn, her face thinner than before but otherwise unchanged. She offered no explanation for her absence. She spoke to no one. She simply returned to the farm and resumed her life as if nothing had happened. The people of the valley watched from a distance. They whispered. They speculated, but they did not approach her. They were afraid. And they were right to be afraid, because in July of 1878, Evangeline married for the fifth time. Her husband was a man named Matthias Green, a blacksmith who had recently arrived in the valley from Virginia. Matthias was a large man, strong, confident, not easily intimidated. When warned about Evangeline, he dismissed the concerns. He said he did not believe in curses or bad luck. He said Evangeline was a beautiful woman who had suffered misfortune and deserved happiness. He said he would protect her, that anyone who spoke ill of her would answer to him. The wedding took place in August, once again at the Marsh farm with no guests and no celebration. Matthias moved into the house with Evangeline. He set up a forge on the property and began taking work from neighboring farms. For a few weeks, things seemed normal. Matthias was seen regularly in town. He seemed happy, healthy. But by September, the change was evident. Matthias began to look ill. His skin took on a grayish pallor. He lost weight rapidly. His hands, which had been steady and sure, began to tremble. When asked about his health, he said he was fine, just tired, working too hard. But those who saw him could tell it was more than that. Something was draining the life from him. In October of 1878, Matthias Green was found dead in his forge. The fire had gone out. The tools were scattered. Matthias was slumped over his anvil, his arms hanging limp, his head resting on the cold iron. The cause of death was never determined. There were no injuries, no signs of illness. He simply appeared to have stopped living. The doctor who examined the body, a man named Jonathan Hayes, noted in his report that Matthias's body was cold. Far colder than it should have been given the time since death. And when Dr. Hayes attempted to move the body, he found that Matthias's hands were clenched around something. The doctor pried the fingers open. In Matthias's palm was a small object, a ring, made of what appeared to be bone, carved with the same symbols that Detective Thorne had seen in the well. Dr. Hayes took the ring to show the sheriff, but when he reached into his pocket to retrieve it, the ring was gone. He searched his coat, his bag, his office. He never found it. He told the sheriff about it, but without evidence there was nothing to be done. Matthias Green was buried in the Valley Cemetery. Evangeline did not attend the funeral. She remained at the farm, alone once more, but not alone for long, because there were still men who did not believe, who did not heed the warnings, who thought they could be the exception, the one who survived, the one who saved her, or perhaps they simply could not resist. Perhaps whatever Evangeline was, whatever she had become, exerted a pull that could not be denied. In the winter of 1879, Evangeline married for the sixth time. Her husband was a man named Isaac Keller, a widower in his 50s, a farmer of modest means. Isaac had lived in Granger Valley his entire life. He knew Evangeline's history. He knew about the dead husbands. His own children begged him not to marry her. His friends shunned him, but Isaac seemed beyond reason. He said that Evangeline needed him, that she was alone and vulnerable, that it was his Christian duty to care for her. His daughter, a woman named Sarah, would later describe her father's behavior in the weeks before the wedding as, quote, unnatural. He would sit for hours staring at nothing. He would wake in the night and walk to the window as if someone had called him. He stopped eating. He stopped attending church. It was as if his will was not his own, as if he were a puppet being moved by invisible strings. I tried to stop him. I begged him. But on the day of the wedding, he walked out of the house and never came back, unquote. Isaac Keller's body was found in March of 1879, frozen in the creek that ran through the Marsh property. The water was shallow, barely ankle deep, but Isaac had drowned, or so the official report stated. The position of the body, however, suggested something else. Isaac was on his knees in the water, his upper body bent forward, his face submerged. His hands were at his sides, not reaching out, not struggling. It was as if he had knelt down in the creek and deliberately held his breath until he died, or as if someone or something had held him there. There were marks on his shoulders, impressions, as if hands had pressed down on him with great force. But the marks were strange. The fingers were too long, the spacing too wide. They did not match any human hand. The death of Isaac Keller marked a turning point. The people of Granger Valley had had enough. A meeting was called at the church in April of 1879. Over 100 people attended. They spoke openly about what had been happening. 6 men had married Evangeline Marsh. All 6 were dead. A 7th man, Peter Cobb, had disappeared after confronting her. The pattern was undeniable. The threat was real. Something had to be done. But what? There was still no evidence of murder. No witnesses to any crime. Evangeline could not be arrested. She could not be tried. Some suggested she be driven out, that the men of the valley go to the farm and force her to leave. Others argued that violence would only bring more trouble, that the authorities would intervene, that they would all be held accountable. Reverend Cole suggested that Evangeline be offered help, that perhaps she was suffering from some affliction of the mind that caused her to attract misfortune, that she needed compassion, not condemnation. This suggestion was met with anger. People shouted that the Reverend was naive, that Evangeline was not sick, that she was evil, that she was a witch, that she needed to be dealt with in the old ways. The meeting ended without resolution, but something had changed. The fear had turned to anger, and anger in a place like Granger Valley was dangerous. If you're still listening, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? In the days following the meeting, strange things began to happen in Granger Valley. Livestock died overnight with no apparent cause. Wells that had been pure for decades suddenly ran foul. Children woke screaming from nightmares they could not describe, and people reported seeing figures in the woods, pale figures, moving between the trees, watching. Several families packed up and left the valley, unwilling to stay any longer. Those who remained did so out of stubbornness or poverty or the simple fact that they had nowhere else to go. But they took precautions. They carved symbols above their doors. They left offerings at crossroads. They avoided the northern end of the valley where the Marsh farm sat like a wound in the landscape. And they prayed. They prayed that whatever had taken root in Granger Valley would be satisfied, that it would stop, that the nightmare would end. But their prayers went unanswered. Because in May of 1879, Evangeline prepared to marry for the 7th time. Her intended was a stranger, a man who had appeared in the valley in April with no explanation of where he had come from or why he was there. He gave his name as Silas Rowe. He was tall, gaunt, with pale skin and eyes that were so dark they appeared black. He spoke little. He moved like a shadow, and from the moment he arrived, he was seen in the company of Evangeline Marsh. They were spotted walking together along the creek, standing together at the edge of the woods, sitting together on the porch of the farmhouse as the sun set. People who saw them said there was something wrong about the pair, that they did not move like living people, that they seemed to flicker at the edges as if they were not entirely solid, as if they were reflections in disturbed water. The wedding was set for the last day of May. Reverend Cole refused to perform the ceremony. He told Evangeline that he could not in good conscience marry her again, that too many men had died, that he feared for Silas Rowe's life. Evangeline simply stared at him, her pale eyes unblinking, and said, quote, "You need not fear for him. He is not like the others. He is what I have been waiting for," unquote. The Reverend asked what she meant. She did not answer. She simply turned and walked away, Silas Rowe following behind her like a shadow. The wedding took place at the Marsh farm without a minister. Who officiated, if anyone, is unknown. But on the evening of May 31, 1879, several people reported seeing lights in the windows of the farmhouse. Not the warm glow of candles or lanterns. A cold, blue-white light that pulsed and flickered. And they heard sounds. Chanting. Many voices joined together in a rhythm that was not quite music and not quite speech. The sounds went on for hours, until midnight, and then they stopped. Silence fell over the valley, a silence so complete that people later said it felt as though the world itself had stopped breathing. When dawn came, a group of men from the valley, led by the sheriff, went to the Marsh farm to investigate. They found the house empty. The furniture was still in place. The beds were made. But there was no sign of Evangeline or Silas Rowe. They searched the property. They searched the barn, the fields, the woods. They found nothing. No tracks. No evidence of where they had gone. It was as if they had simply vanished into the air. But they did find one thing. In the bedroom of the farmhouse, on the wall above the bed, someone had carved words into the wood, deep gouges that must have taken hours to create. The words read, quote, 7 opened the door, 7 paid the price, 7 given freely, 7 taken willingly. The covenant is complete, the way is open, we are come through, unquote. Below the words was a symbol. A spiral within a spiral, descending into a central point that seemed to draw the eye, to pull at the mind, to whisper promises of knowledge and power and things that should remain unknown. The sheriff ordered the wall torn down. He had the boards burned. He told the men who had seen it to speak of it to no one. But the words had been seen. The symbol had been seen. And some things once known cannot be forgot. The Marsh farm was abandoned. No one would buy it. No one would live there. Within a few years, the house collapsed, the barn fell, the fields returned to wilderness. The well, the cursed well where Samuel Porter's body had been found, where Detective Thorne had seen the symbols carved into the stone, was filled in with rocks and earth. A cairn was built over it as a warning. But even covered, even buried, there were those who said they could still hear things coming from beneath the stones. Whispers, scratching, the sound of something vast and patient shifting in the darkness, waiting. Evangeline Marsh was never seen again. Sela's Row was never seen again. No bodies were ever found. No explanation was ever given. The official record lists Evangeline as missing, presumed dead, but the people of Granger Valley knew better. They knew that Evangeline had not died. She had completed something, a ritual, a summoning, a bargain. 7 men had married her. 7 men had died, and in their deaths something had been accomplished. Some door had been opened. Some boundary had been crossed. Reverend Cole, in a sermon delivered in June of 1879, spoke obliquely about what had happened. He said, quote, "There are places in this world where the veil is thin, where the old things, the things that were here before us and will be here after us, can reach through. There are people who, through blood or design or terrible misfortune, become conduits for those things. We have seen such a person. We have witnessed what can happen when the old powers are given a foothold in our world. Let us pray that the door has been closed. Let us pray that what has been let in will not spread. But if I am honest, and I must be honest before God, I do not believe the door is closed. I believe it is open. And I believe we will see the consequences of that in ways we cannot yet imagine," unquote. The Reverend's words proved prophetic. In the years following 1879, Granger Valley fell into decline. Families moved away. Farms failed. The population dwindled. By 1900, fewer than 50 people remained. By 1920, the valley was all but abandoned. Those who stayed reported continued strangeness, disappearances, lights in the woods, voices in the dark. The land itself seemed to sicken as if poisoned from within. Trees grew twisted, crops withered. Animals refused to enter certain areas. And people who ventured too close to where the Marsh farm had stood often came back changed. They would not speak of what they had seen. They would only stare with wide, frightened eyes and whisper that they had heard someone calling their name, that they had seen someone standing in the ruins, a woman in a white dress, pale and cold and smiling. If you're still listening, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? In 1935, a researcher from the University of North Carolina, a folklorist named Dr. Eleanor Hartwell, traveled to what remained of Granger Valley to collect stories and oral histories from the last residents. She interviewed a dozen people, most of them elderly, most of them reluctant to speak. But one woman, a woman who gave her name only as Mary and who claimed to be 93 years old, told Dr. Hartwell a story that was never published in any academic journal but exists in Dr. Hartwell's private notes, now archived at the university library. Mary said that she had been a young girl living in Granger Valley in 1879. She said she remembered Evangeline Marsh. She said, quote, "I saw her once up close. I was with my mother at the store. Evangeline came in. Everyone stopped talking. Everyone stared. She walked past us and I looked into her eyes. They were empty. There was nothing behind them, nothing human. I asked my mother what was wrong with the woman. My mother grabbed my hand and pulled me out of the store. She told me never to look at that woman again. She told me that Evangeline Marsh was not a woman anymore, that something had gotten inside her when she was young, that her mother had tried to control it but had failed, that Evangeline was a vessel, a door, and that she was looking for the right keys to open herself fully. My mother said the keys were men, 7 men, each one willingly given, each one a sacrifice. I did not understand then, but I understand now. Evangeline did not kill those men. She fed them to something, something that lived in the well, something that her mother had discovered and tried to appease. But Ruth Marsh was weak. Evangeline was not. Evangeline completed what her mother had started, and when the 7th man was given, the door opened. I was there the night it happened. I saw the lights, I heard the sounds, and I saw what came out of the well, unquote. Dr. Hartwell pressed Mary for details. What had come out of the well, Mary would not say. She only shook her head and repeated, quote, I cannot speak of it. To speak of it is to invite it. It is still there. It has always been there. And it is waiting for someone else to hear it. Someone else to open the way, unquote. Dr. Hartwell left Granger Valley disturbed by what she had heard. She attempted to verify Mary's account, to find records or evidence that supported the story. But the records from 1879 were incomplete. Many had been lost or destroyed. The few that remained told only the bare facts: 7 marriages, 7 deaths, 1 disappearance, no explanations. Dr. Hartwell concluded her research and moved on to other projects. But in a letter to a colleague written in 1936, she confessed, quote, I have studied folklore and mythology for 20 years. I have collected hundreds of ghost stories and legends. I have always approached them as cultural artifacts, as windows into the fears and beliefs of a people. But Granger Valley is different. I cannot dismiss what I heard there as mere superstition. There is something in that place, something real, something that defies rational explanation. I do not know what it is, but I know that it is still there, and I know that I will never return, unquote. Today, Granger Valley is a name on old maps that no longer correspond to any populated place. The roads that once led there are overgrown. The farms are gone. The church is a pile of rotted wood. The cemetery where some of the victims of Evangeline Marsh are buried is almost impossible to find, choked with briars and saplings. But the land remains, and the well, despite being filled in over a century ago, can still be found if you know where to look. The cairn of stones is still there, weathered and moss-covered, a silent marker of something that should not be disturbed. There are stories, modern stories, from hikers and hunters who have wandered into the area. They speak of finding the ruins of a farmhouse, of feeling an overwhelming compulsion to dig at a pile of stones, of hearing voices calling their names from beneath the ground. Most ignore the compulsion. They leave quickly, shaken but unharmed. But a few do not. A few stay. A few dig. And those few are never seen again. In 2008, a graduate student in anthropology from Duke University named Michael Preston decided to write his thesis on the legend of Evangeline Marsh. He spent months researching, tracking down documents, interviewing descendants of people who had lived in Granger Valley. He became convinced that there was a rational explanation for the events of 1879, that Evangeline had likely been a serial killer who had used poison or manipulation to murder her husbands, that the supernatural elements were embellishments added over time. In October of 2008, Michael Preston drove to the area where Granger Valley had been. He had a map. He had a GPS. He had camping equipment and a week's worth of supplies. He intended to find the site of the Marsh farm, to document it, to prove that there was nothing supernatural about the location. He called his advisor on the evening of October 10th to say he had found the ruins, that he was setting up camp nearby, that he would check in the next day. He never called again. A search was conducted. His vehicle was found parked on an old logging road. His campsite was found a quarter mile into the woods, tent still standing, supplies untouched, but Michael Preston was gone. The search teams combed the area for weeks. They used dogs, they used helicopters, they found nothing. No body, no sign of struggle, no indication of where he had gone. The case remains unsolved. Michael Preston is officially listed as a missing person, but those who knew him, who knew what he was researching, believe they know what happened. They believe he found the well. They believe he heard the voices. And they believe he did what so many others have done. He listened, he dug, and he opened the door. If you're still listening, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to this channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The case of Evangeline Marsh, the Granger Valley Bride, remains one of the most disturbing and unexplained events in American history. 7 men married her. 6 of them died under suspicious circumstances. The 7th, if Silas Rowe can even be called a man, vanished with her. No bodies were recovered from that final night. No evidence of foul play was ever conclusively proven. But the pattern is undeniable. The deaths are real. The disappearances are documented. And the terror that gripped Granger Valley for those 4 years between 1875 and 1879 was no mere superstition. It was something deeper, something older, something that used Evangeline Marsh as a tool, a key, a sacrifice. The question that has haunted researchers for over a century is this: what was Evangeline? Was she a victim, a young woman corrupted or possessed by something she encountered on her family's land? Or was she complicit, a willing participant in a ritual that required the deaths of 7 men to complete? The evidence suggests both. The writings of her mother, Ruth Marsh, indicate that something had been present in Granger Valley long before Evangeline was born. That Ruth had known about it, had tried to appease it, had perhaps even tried to use it. That when Ruth died, Evangeline inherited not just the farm but the burden, the curse, the connection. But the accounts of those who knew Evangeline, who saw her after the deaths began, suggest that she was not merely a victim. She was aware. She was purposeful. She chose her husbands. She led them to their deaths. And she did so without remorse, without hesitation, without humanity. The ritual, if that is what it was, followed a clear pattern. 7 men. Each one married willingly. Each one brought to the farm. Each one dying in a different way, as if each death served a specific purpose in the larger design. Jacob Pritchard hanged. Samuel Porter drowned in the well. Elias Cobb torn apart. Daniel Frost wasting away. Matthias Green drained of life. Isaac Keller held beneath the water. And finally Silas Rowe, who did not die but disappeared, taken or transformed or consumed. 7 sacrifices. 7 keys. 7 locks opened. And when the 7th was turned, the door, whatever that door was, swung wide. What came through that door is a question that cannot be answered with certainty. The accounts are fragmentary, contradictory, often third-hand. But they all agree on one thing. Something emerged from the well on the night of May 31st, 1879. Something that had been trapped or sleeping or waiting beneath the earth. Something that Evangeline Marsh had been bred or groomed or shaped to release. And once released, it did not leave. It stayed in the valley. It poisoned the land. It drove people away. And it waited, as it had always waited, for the next person to hear its voice. The next person to open the way. The final question, the one that keeps researchers awake at night, is this: is the door still open? The ritual was completed over a century ago. Evangeline Marsh is long dead, if she ever truly lived. The well is buried. The farm is gone. But the disappearances continue. The stories persist. And there are those who claim that if you go to Granger Valley, if you find the ruins, if you stand in the place where the Marsh farmhouse once stood, you can still hear it. A voice, soft and insistent, calling your name, promising knowledge, promising power, promising answers to questions you did not know you had. And if you listen, if you follow that voice to the cairn of stones, if you begin to dig, you will find the well. And you will find that it is not empty, that something still lives there, something vast and cold and patient, something that has been waiting for you, because the door was not closed. It was only opened wider. And Evangeline Marsh, the Granger Valley Bride who married 7 men and killed them all, was not the end of the story. She was only the beginning.